Is it a cheeky little Chablis or a Chardonnay or a Soif?
I can pronounce it. So I'm going to go there.
It's you. Tell us the truth. It's just got white wine written on the label, hasn't it?
Got Plonk. Le Plonk.
What have you got there, Georges Boulier?
I've got Aldi's Kronenberg in a little can. 1079 project.
All right. Yeah. Right.
And George, is that a bullet wound in your can, or a dent, should we say?
Yeah, it is. It's quite good. That Jamie, you spotted that.
And where was that in the wall, George?
Yeah, these cans have always been aged 100 years. So the First World War, they were cleaning them off the Somme, and then quite expensive, £4 a can.
Fair enough.
It's worth it for the flavour.
Fair enough.
Absolutely.
And what year was it made, George? I see a year on there.
1079.
Was not kind of made after the Battle of 1066? What was the Battle of 1066?
Battle of Hastings.
Battle of Hastings. Was it not from then, George?
10 years after that, yeah.
Very good.
Still tastes all right as well, doesn't it?
Yeah, it's fine. It's just a cheap version of Kronenberg. It's decent.
All right. Okay. Right. I have a snidey little kind of. It's kind of like what's them ones you put?
Corona.
It's called a Camaro. Camaro, and it's one of them. It's one of them ones you put a lime in. But the really interesting thing is I opened it with this.
Wow. That was from the Battle of Hastings, surely.
I made that at school when I was about 14. That's nearly 40 years old coming up. Made by my own
school.
hand. Yes.
You escaped school.
That's good, George. I'm impressed with that one.
It's good that we're on fire tonight. Søren Kierkegaard was a Danish philosopher, a theologian, a poet, and a social critic. What a guy! Yeah, considered to be the first existentialist philosopher. So this is why I love this guy. This is how I came across him when I was reading Jean-Paul Sartre, just of an evening, like you do, just casually reading some Sartre of an evening, and I came across this guy, and I thought I've got to find out more about this guy. So I googled him, it's like you do these days, and he said some fascinating things. He was a bit strange, I think. He said life can only be understood backwards, but it must be lived forwards.
Wow. Oh, it's too late in the night to understand.
I know. I don't get it, but yeah, I don't know. And today is to lose one's footing momentarily. Not today is to lose one's self. Epic, isn't it? There you go. Interesting.
Cartoon strip about his concept of self. Which is actually the day. So I'll post that on, and you might want to share it and put it in your little.
I can tag it in the thing. He also wrote under pseudonyms so that you disagree with himself, so he could have an argument with himself in public without people knowing it was actually him that was arguing with. I've seen you having debates with yourself, Mr. Scorer, just over a coffee.
It's happened many a time. But I always win. That's the thing. I always win.
And interesting, he's one of these characters. It often puzzles me how these philosophers of this time, early 1800s, it always puzzles me how they have time to do philosophy. Do you know what I mean? And not have to go and work and stuff. But he survived completely off an inheritance from his father, who was a wool merchant. So he survived off that inheritance, allegedly. But I've done some digging around. And you know how we like to try and only use philosophers who have a connection with the Northeast? Mm-hmm. Well as living off the inheritance, he'd spent so much of it that eventually he was the fella that used to collect the trolleys at Sainsbury's over at the Arneson Centre. That's what he used to do. To make over the Arneson Centre near Durham, just over where I live. And he was eventually sacked because he was trying to pinch the pound coins off people because his inheritance off his dad had ran out.
Is that where that advert come from? It's a Tesco's at Asda's with a young girl, and she tries to pinch her dad's pound coin.
Yeah,
inspired by him.
Might be.
Wow.
fascinating.
Brilliant.
I failed to find a radiator reference though. Apparently, he had nothing to do with any radiator inventions.
Well, I'm a bit disappointed because I had heard he invented the floating radiator.
Okay.
Wasn't actually attached to anything. It was held with some kind of force.
Oh,
Like a Jedi or Harry Potter type of radiator. I thought you would have found that out. But,
well, clearly I need to go back to my research and try again. He was called the greatest Dane ever, but also the gloomiest Dane.
the greatest and the gloomiest.
Aye, and the most difficult of Danes that there ever were. Considered to be the greatest Christian of his century. And yet, others claim he was trying to destroy the historic Christian faith. There you go. Interesting.
That's a bit of a contradiction, though, isn't it?
Yeah. Hang on, this is Sainsbury's coming through on the text. Apparently they didn't.
Turn your trolley.
apparently they didn't sack him. He decided to leave of his own free will before they got him through the disciplinary court.
Disclosure agreement.
What is free will? What is free will? Did he debate that?
Free will.
Free will, not free will.
So here's the thing that he said that I thought we could contemplate tonight. So he tells this story of a clown. The clown is backstage, all made up, ready to kind of go on and entertain the throng in the theatre, and a fire breaks out backstage, and the clown runs on stage shouting "Fire! Fire! Fire!" and the audience just think this is hilarious because he's a clown. So they applaud. Yeah, this is amazing. The clown, he's so funny. He's shouting about the fact there's a fire. And he's going, no, there's a fire. And of course, the more he shouts, there's a fire, the more the crowd applaud. Because they just think it's really funny that this clown is shouting fire, fire, fire. And he ends up thinking, well, I can't do anything to persuade them that there actually is a real fire. So he leaves the theatre, and everybody else is burned to death in the blaze because they ignored the clown, trying to explain to them, trying to get them to move urgently out of the building. And one of the things that is said about this analogy is that the clown of all performers, his main feature is that he must always be the clown. He always has to wear the face, the makeup of a clown. He can't ever be anything else. An acting can be whatever an actor wants to be, but the clown must always be a clown and made up to look specifically like a clown, hiding behind a kind of mask, I suppose. So that's Kierkegaard's kind of idea about the clown, and I wonder where we kind of take that. I know my first practice educator said that we're all actors on the stage. That's what I thought of when I thought of that we have to be whoever the person in front of us kind of wants us to be. But I just wondered whether sometimes we live up to the facade, if you like, of the social worker, and we become what people expect of us rather than what we are.
That's interesting because I think I've got three points to take from that. One, your career as an entertainer was very evident there.
Yeah.
That was very impressive. I'm really good. Really good.
Can I move my hand better?
Oh god, yeah. But it was good. It was well worked. I appreciated it. George nearly smiled at one point.
I spent a lot of time putting it together. I mean, 5 or 10 minutes at least.
And I took it a different way. I think is do we not paint the service? I hate that. I don't like that word. But the people who use our service, should we say, the people who need a social worker as the clown, and not that we see them as a comic book character, definitely not, but that we see them as an unchanging figure. These are somebody who needs our support, and they can't change out of that. They will always be somebody who needs our support, and I think that one of the barriers for strength-based practice, because we can't see them past or as an equal, as a human being to ourselves. And the third point is exactly the same as your point: is are we the clowns and nobody can see us?
Yeah. I mean, I think I'd agree with that. I mean, the things that came to mind as I was kind of thinking about this were, if someone is a misuser of substances and they tell us kind of, this time I'll change, do we kind of go, well, yeah, but you're always this person, and you're always going to be that person, or people with a learning disability where they want to have relationships, for example. That's the thing that we read about in the Mental Capacity Act kind of case, isn't it? They want to have a relationship, but you couldn't possibly have a relationship because you're somebody with a learning disability, and that's who you are. And people with learning disabilities don't have relationships and sex and children and all that kind of thing. So you're right. It's two sides. It's either, do we sometimes just fall into character and behave in a particular way, but also do we see other individuals made up, if you like, in the person that they are because of the label we attach. It's a label in theory kind of thing, isn't it, I suppose?
And do we need that as social workers? I'm not saying us three, but just in a profession, do we hold some kind of value to that, where we're seen as the experts and we're the people who put the cape on and go out and rescue, because we see them people as that, and we need them to be dependent and needing us. I don't know. It's just a question. I know it's an issue that George has raised many times. So I'll hand over to George.
Yeah, I'm just thinking it through. It is really interesting. I suppose the moral of the story is the audience should say, "Oh, he's given them a warning. Well, lives are at risk. Let's get out the theatre." It's a very practical solution, isn't it? Really, to cut through it all. But because they're all invested in the original start point, and there's a double irony, whether he intended or not. There's a farce in the clown, isn't there? And the real farce that we're observing in the quote is that these people are burned to death because someone told them the building's on fire and they didn't shift. That's the real farce, isn't it? It's sort of like a double lock-in sort of thing.
Yeah, I really like that idea about the fact that whole scene is viewed from the starting point, isn't it? That this person that's walked on stage is a clown. And do you think we sometimes do that as practitioners? Do you think sometimes our minds are made up based on the referral or based on our not historic knowledge of situations, that our minds are sometimes made up and we've sometimes got a solution before we've even, or the risk is we've got a solution before we even meet the person, and when we're pressed for time, we actually like the fact we've got a solution because we can just get on with the job. Is that a danger?
Oh, exactly. I mean, the analogy comes to my head isn't social work, but again, I'll often go to teaching. I don't know why. Maybe I'm always want to be a teacher. Day one, comprehensive school, you're the maths teacher. You have to put the kids into sets. Bottom set, top set. Those kids aren't shifting out those sets till 16. So what's the teacher doing?
Yeah.
That's interesting, because I was thinking something on a similar line there, just bring it back to social work education. And there's an expectation that the student will become a social worker. So our starting point, going back to the analogy, our starting point is this person will traverse through the education system and get the cap and gown and qualify and become a social worker. As social workers, when we work with people, is there an expectation that these people become independent of social work services? I don't think there is. And I think that's the fundamental problem, I think, that we need to be talking about, I think.
Just going back to that, do you mean the problem is we expect social workers to move into statutory setting practice? Is that what you're saying there?
No, I think it's because we're starting point with social education is that these people will move through the system and become social workers. Right. So there's an expectation that this is going to happen. I don't think there's an expectation that people will become independent of social work services as a result of our intervention. So we see them as the clown that has no movement. And is that our our issue that we need to tackle and say, hang on, we don't need to see them as the clown that has no moment. We need to see them in the same way as we would see anyone progressing through any stages of their life.
Right. Yeah. Got you. Yeah. No, absolutely. And I mean, I say it many times. The role of social work is to eradicate the need for social work.
Yeah.
Isn't it? Yeah. So it's that thing, isn't it? So we should not see somebody in a perpetual cycle. We should see them as being able to achieve and move beyond whatever their current problem, difficulty kind of is. It's interesting that we frame it like that, because actually I think one of the things that social work does offer is the fact that we see in people the capacity to change. Yet I think sometimes we fall into the trap of thinking they can't, and we just need to do the job and move on, because
I would agree.
The problem will just exist perpetually. I suppose I hold my hand up and say I know very little about the kind of child protection, children work arena, but I get a sense of repeating cycles in that. That parents have children who then have children and they behave like the parents. Is that fair? Is that what happens?
That pretty much holds, because obviously children are brought up in a family with a capital F. It's the grandparents, it's the aunts, and uncles, it's the neighbours, it's these things. So if you're brought up in a tough area where people have had similar problems, alcoholism, domestic violence, these things, the likelihood, not the concrete certainty, that you're going to go a certain way is so much higher, because it's more of your normal than maybe it should be. So it's just that bit more acceptable. Or I've had an argument with somebody. How do I deal with that? Your brain accesses all the iterations of arguments it's seen. Well, I'll play one of those out. Thank you very much. Because people don't. Well, to link in the clown example is it's something out of the normal, isn't it? If a fireman says get out, there's a fire, yes, that's okay. Something out of the normal, your brain can't access it, can it? No, that's the clown. I'm used to that 50 times. So if you've solved the last 50 or you've seen the last 50 problems solved by smash, drink, clash, police come, that's in your frame of reference. You're entirely a victim of that. Not to say it's inescapable, but it's the weight of numbers. Maybe one child out of 10 can escape it, but the 9 can't. It's that level of oppression, isn't it? And I think the error social work makes, and I'm big on this one at the moment, it focuses so down on mothers or couples, but really children are brought up in communities. It's schools, it's estates, it's families, it's aunts, uncles. It's that far more ecological. We don't offer anything at all at that level of intervention. And really, we just boil it down, get the microscope out, and boil it down to this very narrow relationship, which really is never. It's just going to sort of home in on it just freeze that problem down further.
Yeah. That kind of leads me to think of something that I'm always talking about as well, is that we try to teach. I don't know how successful we are, but we try to teach students about that ecological view, about the fact that children aren't just within their family unit, that they are part of a community. Grandparents. I mean, I can think of a case study that I've been using this semester with our level 5 students, which is about that. It's about how is this child seated within this community, and what strengths are there, not just in the parent-child relationship. What strengths are there? They're broader than that. But what you seem to be saying is that while that might be the ideal and that might be how it actually is, in reality, that's not how social work happens.
Well, we don't have anything to say outside of aiming with guns at the parent, so that the usual target.
Well, isn't it, George? Sorry, is it not that what you said before in the past is that we take people to the legal line, so where the Children's Act sits, the Care Act sits, the Mental Capacity Act sits, and we take them just beyond that, so our intervention is no longer legally required anymore. And to do that, we target it down to that microscopic level. We kind of fix that little problem there, or focusing on that area, and this other stuff that we teach doesn't go. It sits far beyond that legal line, and therefore, because we don't get to that vaster area, a broader area, where kind of people just kind of topple back over. Is that what you're saying?
No, this is the slope and line thing. My great oats. But no, that's exactly the point. But equally, on the legal point, going back to the child, I mean, to link it to the clown, maybe is who's got legal responsibility for health and safety in the building? Not the clown. Who's got legal parental responsibility for the child? Only the parents, not the school, not the nana across the road, not the auntie, not the other people that are probably really invested in powerful in that situation. But the law has got nothing to say for those people at all. I can't take the aunt to court. Do you see what I mean?
Yeah.
Well, you've seen it all happen, pet. You could have took that baby home and done what they were doing 100 years ago and just looked after him. It doesn't exist. That option doesn't exist.
I don't know what you think of this thing, because this is it kind of ties in, and it's something that I can't remember whether I read it in the Guardian or not. That I come to think about it, might have been Community Care. Was a practitioner writing saying that we view parents as a means to an end rather than end in themselves, so that the parents are purely there we do whatever we do so the parents can protect the child. The child is the end, but actually the parents are an end in themselves as well. And again, I'm outside my comfort zone here, but how much intervention is made with the parents around their problems, or is it all focused on you need to be a better parent, you need to meet that threshold?
I think this is really interesting, Stephen, because I think the clown, it really works as an analogy, because it's this simplistic sort of surface level line that we take people on. And a parent, my phrase, I often say it, and probably a week doesn't go by, how can you not function as a person, an adult first, before you can be a parent? Parent role has to come after being a functioning adult. But the children's social worker, I've not seen many times, maybe I've never seen it, to support that person to become a functioning adult first, or then become a parent. And again, Jamie's point is a very good one. The court does not care. Well, has the mum got a job? Has she joined Swimming World? Has she got some friends that are going to give her a release? Or all these things that everybody knows. Has she done the park run? Or some bizarro little thing that would be the person you want to have a conversation with, the person that's growing, well, they will just slam parent risk assessment on you. So it's that inertia down rather than out.
Yeah, and I think it's important to point out there, to emphasise the point, it's not about the physical things that lose weight or get exercise. It's also about having a good social friends, or doing things like this, I mean, a podcast, or going out with your mates and just having a release. And I think that's the point you're trying to make, George, isn't it? It's like to be a well-rounded human being in a person before you become that parent. So that doesn't have to be tagged onto what society deems as being, a good person. It's like what works for you, isn't it?
Exactly. The analogy I always use, and you'll back this up, Jamie, we took the kids that went to Harriers and stayed at Harriers between the ages of 15 and 17. What universities did they go to? What did they do later in life? That would be any secondary school in South Tyneside by a million miles, because they stuck at something. The parents supported them to stick at something, and they did it because they wanted to. It's as difficult and as simple as that.
Yeah. And there wasn't many people who didn't have that. There were some who did really well, but the vast majority of people had come from very supportive backgrounds and went to the high-end universities.
Is this not a? I mean, I think it adds weight to the argument, because the government have kicked against the social work degree as being a generic degree at times over the last however many years. It adds weight, what you've just said about the fact that you need an adult before you need a parent. Adds weight to the argument that it should be a generic degree, but makes me wonder, should social work be a generic profession where people understand both the adult and the child in order to be able to support whatever needs to take place?
I've always thought that's where it needs to sit. I know that I haven't heard strong arguments against it, to be fair. I'm sure they're out there, but I haven't really heard them because I think, to understand from my professional background, elderly mental health was predominantly what I did. So some of the theories that George would have used with children and families were the exact same theories I use. So if we look at attachment theory, Bowlby's attachment theory, so I would use that. So, and I would look at how people had made attachments towards their lifestyle, to the role in the family, to the household, to their person that they are. And then, that was kind of eroded because of an illness that they may have had. And it was further eroded by the way we manage that illness by placing people into care homes and things. So we kind of picked away at people's attachments that they had until then we try to kind of make an attachment up and just kind of substitute that. So I think without the theories are the same, aren't they? They all kind of fit in because we're not dealing with children and we're not dealing with adults. We're dealing with human beings, and every child, or hopefully the majority, that work on that principle. Every child becomes an adult, and every adult was a child.
Mm-hmm.
So that's why I think social work should be generic.
Mm.
For a very fundamental reason.
Interesting, because that's not how it is. It isn't. It hasn't for a long time. It hasn't been there for a long time, has it? Yeah.
What do you mean by that?
Well, in my recollection of social work, since as long as I've been involved in it, and from the Community Care Act, I suppose, and from the inceptions of all those key bits of legislation, we've always separated out adult work and children's work, haven't we?
Oh, you mean in practice?
Yeah, in practice, yeah, absolutely, yeah. And I don't even think, certainly in my time as a social worker, I don't even think there was much kind of cross-fertilization of ideas between adult services and children's services. I remember more arguments about whether it's your case or it's your case, not kind of, well, let's allocate both an adult care social worker and let's allocate a children's social worker and get you to work together. I mean, I know that's a resource issue potentially, but is that not an effective way to kind of work,
I suppose my take on that is I think social work's become very, very specialised now, or it can be. So if you look at even the legal aspects, I think for a social worker to understand and grasp, the Children's Act as much as to understand the Care Act and the mental capacity and mental health, all those acts together. Is it too much of an ask? I don't know. I'm asking the question. Is it too much of an ask? I mean, George, you worked with me in adult services and then you transferred over to children's services. So you have probably a wider experience of both. Do you think it's a social worker could be generic as once qualified?
I think my analysis would be, I think adults legislation is more of a difficult task to hold in your mind, to weigh these things up. It's more of a mental task. With safeguarding, not that straightforward. There's not a lot to hold in your mind in terms of the Capacity Act, splitting it down. I know you're very good at that, Jamie. You've almost got to do an equation, don't you, as you weigh it up in splitting the things off. Safeguarding's a far more straightforward action than that, I would say. So I think you could definitely operate as a children's social worker with a very limited understanding of the Children's Act, because ultimately the child comes first, protect the child. You see what I mean? You can just shove all the effort in one direction and you won't go too far wrong. With adults, it's a far more of a weighing up act. I'm talking in very broad terms.
Yeah. And I think because autonomy comes into play much more in adults than it is with children, is my understanding. So a fundamental question is, can you or should we look at social work generically, or remain, or should we kind of continue to kind of develop more specialized services? I don't know. I generally don't know what the answer is to that.
Well, I think we're certainly being pushed down the more specialist route, aren't we? Even with stuff that now traditionally was done by social workers in local authorities or by social work teams in local authorities, qualified and unqualified workers, now being put out into the private sector. So social workers become doers of less and less of what might have been traditionally thought the social work task. I was talking to a couple of advocates a few months ago, preparing preparing a lecture on advocacy, and they described their job. And I was just kind of sat there going, no, what you've just described there is the job of a social worker. But it wasn't the job of a social worker anymore. They were talking about, being non-judgmental, empowering people to represent themselves, all the things you'd expect from an advocate, which in my head were just, that's when I was in social work school anyway, and it's the same that we talk to the students about now. All of the things that we're talking about were all of the things that we talk as being the social work task. But then as a social worker, you don't get to do a lot of those things, do you? Sometimes.
The example in my head, and I think you like it as well, Steve, is that Dr. Chatterjee, doctor in the house. So say we had a fantasy child protection case, and again, linking it back to the story, this mom's been labelled a bad mother, she's the clown, she wears the mask, she's a bad mom. Say Dr. Chatterjee went in that house, and his sole job was to work on the mom. Medication history, look how she slept, what she ate, what's her habits, when does she have time for herself, blah, 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 blah. You just bottom all those things out. And no one would disagree that wouldn't put mum in a better place. If you could find issues, and inevitably you would find these issues, but we're gonna sort out your mental health, we're gonna sort out how you're sleeping, we're gonna improve your diet, we're gonna get you exercising, and you'll feel better in 2 months. In that shift, and this is what me and Jamie always talk about when we do solution focus, just shift one thing a little bit, and the whole equation starts to change. That's how you get that change. But this is almost exactly what social work doesn't offer, does it really? Because the atypical practice is 2-3 months in, I've just done my parenting assessment. It's asking mum the questions and you're writing them down. I know that social work at its worst, but that model still exists, doesn't it? Being inquiries rather than it's green for go already. Crack on, mate, by the way.
Yeah. I think a different sort of social work exists in the independent sector, or am I just looking at that through rose-coloured spectacles? It's the impression I get anyway that the social work with a small s that our students see going on in their first placements in the independent voluntary sector is quite different to the social work with a capital S that goes on in local authorities. So I don't know whether maybe independent sector sees a lot more of that nurturing therapeutic kind of role going on.
It is very interesting.
I think there's local authorities have a huge amount of responsibilities and a huge amount of pressure with extremely limited resources. So I think they have to have a very efficient machine. And I think I mentioned this before, is that we kind of hopefully produce critical thinking social workers, but then they become politicians who have a role to do, and it's a very difficult one. Is to kind of make sure that these people's rights are protected where they can. So I think they're quite limited in what they can do, and I wouldn't say they become a cog in a system, but that's the kind of analogy that I kind of get drawn to all the time, is that people want to do a bit more, but once they get more of that legal line, is then there's somebody else needs to be done, because ideally it'd be a fantastic world if we can kind of work with people so they go beyond that, where they're not could come back to it. But if we do that, we're neglecting all these people who are sitting on a waiting list. So I don't think it's an easy answer for local authorities. I think it's a really, really tough call. It's a case of let's go back to our social to talk about all the time. Firefighting, that goes back to the clown. So that's what we do.
That's what he's paid for.
Good, like brilliant. Absolutely.
Take a sip of your wine at that point, Jamie. Like university challenge. Got the question right.
I think I wonder as well. Just while you've been talking there, I was thinking about a kind of something about the adult kind of social work as well. And I think sometimes with the Mental Capacity Act, and we've had many a conversation, Jamie, haven't we, about being critical of practice, which leads to a conclusion of lack of capacity rather than supported decision making going on the way that it should. And in a sense, is that not also to do with this idea that the person is wearing the mask of who they are, or the label that they've got dementia, they've got a learning disability, they've got a mental health issue? So we just, even though the Act urges us, it demands of us that we don't see that label. Do you think one of the problems is that we do? see the label and just immediately move to a decision of lack of capacity because we can be then in charge.
And I think that's probably it comes from a very similar place to what I've just described with the local authorities. And I think it becomes from it becomes harder to support somebody to make their own decision, because sometimes that decision might be dangerous and that might fall on our heads. And social work, as we kind of at times we need to protect ourselves because of the adverse impact on the media, because of the decisions that we'll make. But I think that's the danger, isn't it? Is that there's a temptation, because we are all, the majority of social workers are all nice and lovely people, isn't it? And so we have this desire to go into the profession because we want to help people, and we genuinely do. And then you're faced with a scenario thinking, like, hang on, if I say they lack capacity, I can do so much more for them because it's my decision. If I say they have capacity, they're going to take all these risks, and I don't think they can manage them. And I think that's where we'll fall down. And I think it's because we're in that place, is that if we say they lack capacity, I know fine well that the support that they may need may not be as available because of limited resources. So I think we err on the side of a paternalistic view. The paternalistic view is they lack capacity, so I can help you, I can save you. Going back to your clown analogy, is like, if you stop the clown, I can make sure you're all right.
Yeah, and I would agree with the paternalistic thing. I'm not sure that that it's as conscious, maybe as that. I think a lot of it is to do with the environment that you're working in. It's that paternalistic kind of, fear of reproach kind of leads you to think in a particular way, and I don't think social workers deliberately think, hang on, if I say lack of capacity, then I can do whatever I want. But that's the kind of mindset that develops. It's the kind I think often, and I mean, case law is full of examples, so that's not unresearched, is it? I mean, we forget the good practice that goes on as well, but invariably we end up talking about when things have gone a bit wrong, and case law is full of examples where people have kind of jumped to conclusions based on the clown mask
and they call it, in legal terms. I was a lecturer at bar, so I was delivering a lecture rather than I'm talking to him. But he said he referred to the second principle, and for George, the second principle is the support decision making principle. So you must support something to make all the decisions where possible, practically possible. And he called it the orphaned principle, because it was very, really challenged in the court protection, and the only times it was challenged, or the most often time it was challenged, was cases where regarded issues regarding sexual contact. So I suppose it's one of those areas that just hasn't been challenged as much as the other principles have. And I think certainly that piece of research, I mean, we're going to start before lockdown, Stephen, was that we looking at supporting people to make their own decisions, and how could we do that better?
Yeah, absolutely.
Somewhere it's a direction we need to go down, so people can take risks without having a paternalistic view over them.
I suppose what we keep coming back to, the thread in all of this, though, isn't it, is time and resources, or resources and time. It's time and resources, isn't it? It's about having the ability to either take that family with their child past that legal line, or to have the time to invest in support the decision making. And we keep, when are we going to resolve this issue in social work, that we either need, more social workers, because the social workers need more time to work with people effectively, so they don't shortchange people, for want of a better phrase. The people get the full force of what they're entitled to, and I don't mean services, I mean entitled to in terms of our approach to them. Is that a simple? I'm not a fan of throwing money at problems, but is this a problem where if money was thrown at it and there were more social workers, it would resolve some of these issues?
I don't know, George needs to get in there, so I think we've been talking for a bit, and George.
I thought he nodded off there momentarily, but I thought he had a pair of them glasses on where there's actually eyes painted on the front. You know what I mean? it's when we moved into talking about the Mental Capacity Act, I thought, oh, I'm out of here, because the Mental Capacity Act has nothing to do with children, Jamie, as well we all know.
Well, George works up until the age of 18, so yes, he should be invested.
Exactly.
But there's a dichotomy, isn't it, between what the government are demanding, or the law, the state is demanding of the profession, and that has increased dramatically since in the past 20 years, especially the last 15 years. The amount of legislative framework guiding what we should do, but quite rightly so. I'm not criticising that, but at the same time, there's been an actual withdrawal of resources and funds towards local authorities. I remember, when the cuts first happened, the amount of social workers that were given redundancies were absolutely the numbers were horrendous. But the demands on what we did increased. So they wanted more for the pound of flesh, quoting Shakespeare there. But give less and less resources to do so.
George.
Oh, I'm just thinking it.
When George is thinking, we're not going to get something profound.
You've always got to think of it. It's an intellectual idea. It's like, say, Jamie, you could do your role, but you were based in a school on a community, and your job was to get to know all the old and vulnerable people on that estate. Again, I think it's going to be similar to the point. Would anyone really disagree that you couldn't do a better job for those people than what you could do as an adult social worker? Would anyone say, no, you can't? By getting to know them and being intertwined in their society and their norms and that community, you couldn't do a better job?
Is that not what rural social work is about, though? I mean, I don't know. I've never been rural social work, but I suppose
Jamie, could be Leggy, it could be Bit of Call. Doesn't matter where. It's not.
Yeah, good point, George.
I think it's this distance and the assessment, the legislation. It creates this distance, this sort of, we're not going to get our hands dirty, by the way. But if social workers were put on the doorstep, it'd be very interesting. Instead of sending the kids out on placements and social work teams, you sent the vast majority into secondary schools. Is counsellors, is chasing a problem from the school that they found to home, or and then chasing it back in the morning. That would be absolutely transformative versus phone call, email, peer referral, this thing. That to me is where you get a solution. Because
sorry, George, is this almost like and I always just laugh at this, my wife used to watch Call the Midwife, and the midwife had every single role under the sun. She was social worker, nurse, midwife, doctor, teacher. She had all these roles, housing officer, all this stuff. And do you think that's the role of a social worker? Do you think, in an ideal sense, is that what you're saying?
Well, would anyone disagree? The nearer you are to the problem, the better view you'd have the problem, the more readily you could handle it. Further away, the more you're hiding behind the computer screen, the email, the second person. That distance creates the problem.
It's interesting you saying that, because there is a move, isn't it, to put social work in schools. We've got one or two of our social workers, social work students, who are going to do placements in schools. So I know, going back 2 or 3 years, we had a student in a school who she got a job in the school as well. So I think there's maybe, don't know whether appetite's the right word, but there's certainly a thought process going on somewhere, because this is a second local authority that I'm aware of locally that are exploring this as an option, at least. So maybe I completely agree with you. And what I tell you, what's interesting is that what schools who've had our students placed in them have said is that the students immediately spot things that they haven't spotted, because they're very focused on the education of the child, rightly so. And suddenly somebody stepping back from purely the education sees a whole load of other things and starts to ask a whole lot of different questions. But you're absolutely right. They've got to be there with the child, observing the child, basis almost, haven't they, to be able to make try to make sense of the child's world, I suppose.
But child protection, you might see the child every 2 to 3 weeks.
Yeah.
To go home with a problem, come round 9 o'clock in the morning, you can follow it up and say, how did you get on last night?
Yeah, yeah.
The most vulnerable children in society get seen once a month, once every 3 weeks. There's no comparison.
Excellent point, George.
You could bin some of your lectures and train them as talking therapists to like very basic sort of talking therapy. And they could all be in schools churning that out. Do you see what I mean? And the volume of information and support that would be achieved, just that one change, I think it can make a lot of difference.
Absolutely. I don't know how I feel about binning some of my lectures, though, Jamie. Do you know what I mean? I've worked hard. I've grafted hard on my lecture on self.
Anyone any one of your lectures, Stephen. I think they should be kind of stored somewhere, some kind of vault, because they're that good.
They are. They're on YouTube.
I have seen them. I am impressed.
We've been talking for nearly an hour, guys. So I think we should maybe have some takeaways for the good people who've made it to this point.
Will there be any?
Who are still with us at this point? But I mean, there's been some exceptional nuggets of conversation in there. I mean, it's been really good. I don't know who wants to go first with a kind of takeaway.
Not at me, George. Okay, that's what my takeaway would have to be. Is that initial point I said, is that I think we need to ensure that when we work with somebody, we don't see them as this unchanging thing. I think we need to recognise that these people that we're working with are the same as we all are, and we are no different just because we have this bit of knowledge, because when different bit of knowledge that they have, and I think we should recognise people as ability to change and to move as we change and move as well, rather than just seeing somebody as, your message isn't as sound because I can't see anything different than the clown in the circus asking people to leave. So that would be my takeaway message.
Maybe I'll go a bit different to Jamie. Maybe us social workers are the clowns. That who's going to hear our warning? We're just wearing the mask of the faceless town hall bureaucrat. Distance from the audience. We're not really involved. We're playing a game. Playing the game of we've got some role with them, but what does that really mean? It's not going to affect their lives, and just there for. Well, it's entertainment in the case of the analogy, but it's a fiction. It's not reality. The fire is reality. The fire is burning, but no one's going to listen. So it'll just slowly burn away. That's the depressing view. And unless we offer something different to the audience as the clown, we're just going to play this farce out forever.
I like that, George. Good.
I like that, yeah.
Chop that, George. Chop that, Stephen.
I know. Well, it doesn't matter what happens.
I'm going after George.
I get to do the final edit, so I can just move this around, or I can drop out the George.
George went home at that point.
Yes.
You're home, George. You're home.
I think it's that, for me, it's that thing about everybody involved in what we do is an end in themselves rather than a means to an end. Be that a parent and a child, or be that a carer and an older person, or a parent and a person with a learning disability, or whatever. They're ends in themselves, not just means to get us to an end for the person who maybe is at the centre because of the legislation or whatever of our intervention. Everybody in the equation that we come into contact with as a social worker is an end in themselves, not just the means to somebody else's end. And I mean, if at that point the music kicked in, that would just be incredible, wouldn't it?